Everybody say hi to the Vice Chair of the committee, Senator Bob Dutton.
Hi, Gary.
He's going to duck out for a few minutes, and he'll be joining us. And several of our colleagues will be making their way in this morning. We recognize that it's a Tuesday morning after a 3-day weekend. Happy President's Holiday belated to all of you. This is a first hearing of the committee, first informational hearing, I should say, of the committee this year. So let me do some housekeeping first. We'll conduct the informational hearing component of our agenda first, and then do the bill consideration component of our agenda after the bill hearing. We do have 4 bills on the agenda today, in addition to talking about broadband. So we'll start as a subcommittee as soon as we are joined by at least one more member, and we do have, as I mentioned, other members of the committee trailing in through the course of the morning. In addition to that, we do have Senate session scheduled for 2 p.m. today. We may be done by then, but if we're not, I will very likely recess at that point and reconvene after session at 2 o'clock, particularly if we're still don't have the perfect attendance necessary to close the roll on votes for the bills. Let me begin by just saying a few words about the informational hearing piece today, and we'll just go ahead and get into the thick of it. It's almost anticlimactic at this point to suggest that our state, our country, and indeed the world is undergoing a digital revolution. Communications technology, the internet, and broadband specifically have really revolutionized the way we live, the way we communicate, and it's now a very critical element, not just to our daily lives, but to developed countries and, in fact, our modern economy. Everything from person-to-person communication is different today than it was 10, 20 years ago. Most people can really relate to the internet and its increasing use and capabilities. Everything from how we interface with our government is being revolutionized given the internet. Most people's early experience with the internet has to do with education and how we learn as well as how we teach. More and more commerce is being done over the internet. And now we're also revolutionizing healthcare, be it telemedicine or electronic medical records and the access to those records by medical professionals. And even all those cool apps on our iPhones and our Blackberries. The world is a very, very different place, all made possible not just by a communications infrastructure, but a constantly upgraded communications infrastructure that simply makes more and more things possible, it seems like, on a daily basis. So that's the first sort of layer of this discussion. Another, from a policy standpoint, that I think bears recognizing. One is, so who does deliver this internet, access and capability? We can stop and think of the phone companies, the telecommunications companies. Well, phone companies as we know them today are far different than what we knew them a generation or two ago. It's not just a dial tone at home anymore. It's at home services like high-speed internet access, and now, given DIVCA, video being made available. But wait a minute, I thought cable companies provided video service. Our cable companies aren't what they were a generation ago. Even cable companies now provide video service and phone service and high-speed internet access or data service. We certainly have people in the satellite area in that marketplace as well. Same thing, video, internet access, etc. And a new emerging debate when it comes to broadband choice, the landline or fiber optic line versus the wireless devices that make some level of broadband access available at a competitive as a competitive option, I should say. So it's not just the evolving technologies, but the evolving marketplace and probably one of the most challenging elements, the evolving regulatory structure, given a shift here in California from local franchise agreements at a city or municipal level to state franchise agreements and what cities have jurisdiction over versus what the state has jurisdiction over. And we have to pay heed to what the federal government has jurisdiction over in that greater regulatory discussion as well. Given all this, I felt it was important this year to have a hearing on broadband. It is indeed the policy of the state to move in a direction where broadband access, affordability, and accessibility is as ubiquitous as possible. But what does that mean? I broke the discussion into sort of four categories. One, the issue of broadband deployment. It's one thing to encourage people to utilize broadband more and more. It's good for education, good for health, good for the economy, good for government efficiency, as I mentioned earlier. But really disingenuous in areas of the state that don't have access to broadband, number one. So what do we look like? What does our map look like in terms of where broadband reaches and choice to consumers? Number two, adoption. It's one thing to deploy broadband and make it available in communities throughout the state, but if people aren't adopting it, utilizing it, subscribing it to the highest extent possible, well, first of all, are they or are they not? And if they're not, why not? So that'll be the adoption segment of today's agenda. Third, investment. We can have all these lofty goals, both at the state and at the federal level, about making broadband available and educating folks, but if the investment isn't there, both on a public and a private side, to actually achieve those goals also are for naught. And fourth, from a workforce standpoint, the money could be there, the goals could be there, the policy could be there, but the people to actually dispatch, modernize our communications infrastructure and maintain that infrastructure, they also represent a core element of keeping California as competitive on a national and international basis as possible. So that is sort of the background and context for the broadband element of our hearing today. And some people have asked, well, why is DIVCA paired up with broadband? Ask the engineers at the various companies what DIVCA has to do with broadband. The bottom line is there's a new and improved pipe coming into many a home by video providers authorized under DIVCA, namely the AT&Ts and Verizons of the world, that are now in many ways competing with the cable companies. So that has played a key role in broadband deployment and broadband options throughout the state of California. Not just from a video standpoint, just from a raw infrastructure standpoint, because that pipe coming into the home is capable of doing a lot of things. It's been a little over 3 years now since DIVCA was approved by the legislature and signed into law, and I thought this was a good time to just sort of check in and see how it's going out there for those participants under DIVCA. Has the deployment been on track with schedules that were agreed to or believed to have been committed to back in 2006? Have the jobs been created? Has the investment been there, as was committed to the legislature during the DIVCA hearings and consideration back in 2006. And last but not least, let me just say that this is an important discussion because we pride ourselves in California at being on the cutting edge. And I think there's broad consensus that state-of-the-art communications infrastructure is not just being on the cutting edge for the sake of being on the cutting edge, but a critical element of keeping California as economically competitive as possible with the rest of the country and the rest of the world. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive into the first panel of the hearing. Let me call forward Michael Morris from the Public Utilities Commission to lay the groundwork here on deployment of and broadband mapping, touching on the first of the four corners that we described here a minute ago. How are we looking?
Good morning.
Morning.
Senator Padilla and Senator Dutton, nice to see you this morning. My name is Michael Morris, and I head up the video franchising and broadband deployment group at the Public Utilities Commission. Handing out a copy of a presentation, and I'm going to go through here and talk about luckily I was happy to hear your introduction because I actually have the answers to some of the questions you posed. So what DIVCA does, the highest level I would say, is it in terms of goals is to promote video competition and also broadband deployment in the state. And the PUC has a role in this. We issue video franchises that used to be the purview of state and local governments, local governments, cities and counties. And we collect a lot of data from those that we franchise, both broadband and video data. So since we started in this business, really end of 2006, or it's 2007, pardon me, the CPUC has received 102 applications for video franchises and amendments, expanding territory or contracting territory in some cases. And we've issued all of those, and that involves 23 individual companies. There's a transition from locally franchised video companies, cable companies in California, to state-issued franchisees, and that happens as the the incumbent cable companies, either their franchises expire or they face competition from a state franchisee. They're allowed to opt out of their franchise, and you'll see that I have a bar chart that shows that about 2/3 of the customers, video customers in California, are now served by state video franchisees. This is data as of the end of 2008. A year earlier, it was about even, half and half. So we're making rapid progress. Also, video competition, one of the main goals, has increased rapidly. You'll see on page 4 that over 3 million households, this is again the end of 2008, so many more now, were offered video service by just AT&T and Verizon as a result of their build-out following their issuance of their state franchises. We also now have several small telephone companies that have entered the market, and we'll have more data from them in next year's report. Now, DIVCA has build-out requirements that are primarily aimed at the large companies, AT&T and Verizon, and who have more than 1 million telephone customers in California. And there are some build-out requirements. We've only had one that's been triggered so far. There's several different stages where they kick in, and that's shown on page 5, that Verizon did satisfy its second-year requirement to offer video to 25% of the households in its telephone service territory. AT&T has its first build-out milestone is coming up in April of this year, and they have to meet the mark of offering video service to 35% of their households in their telephone service territory. Also, AT&T and Verizon are to provide service at no cost to one community center for every 10,000 subscribers, and they are doing that. And there's also a 5th-year build-out requirement for each of them. Verizon has to serve or offer service to 40% of its telephone customers, and AT&T 50%. So those are measures to come. I've got a separate handout with some maps, and there's a large version of it, but that shows the state video franchisees in California. The various companies have different codes, different colors with them, and so forth. And of course, AT&T and Verizon have the larger areas that are similar to their telephone service territories. More upcoming deadlines for AT&T and Verizon under DIVCA. Within 3 years of commencing service, they're supposed to offer video 25% of the homes that they serve are to be low-income households, and in 5 years, that's 30% of the homes they offer video service to should be low-income households, and that's a continuing obligation. So those are all statistics that we'll be watching and measuring with the help of the data that we get annually from the companies. Let me talk a little about broadband availability and subscribership, because as you indicated, there is a connection between video and broadband service, broadband being generally considered high-speed access to the internet. So under DIVCA, the PUC gathers data annually from the providers. And that has that approach to gathering data in California has shifted and improved over the years. Before DIVCA, there was voluntary data that was given to the governor's broadband task force. That was a one-year project that the governor had initiated. A lot of the industry participated, and if you put up the next map, or turn to the map in your handouts, this is a map showing broadband availability in California with speed tiers shown in the different colors. Now, this is a map that originally was done by the Broadband Task Force, and that the PUC has taken over and maintained and updated with data that we get from the California Advanced Service Fund applications and challenges to those applications, and also from the Emerging Technology Fund. They have a number of rural projects that are demand-side broadband projects, and they've gathered information locally about the availability of broadband services in rural areas. And we reflect that information on this map as well. This map is interesting, particularly it shows several things. There is quite a bit of white territory, but the amount of households, percentage of households that are covered, showing that they're served, is about 96% of the households in California. Now
so that's what we would call sort of a penetration rate.
That is what we call penetration here, and that's reflected as a ratio of the number of subscribers or subscribing households to the total number of households in California. Oftentimes, in the cable or video business, penetration is also used to refer to the ratio of subscribing households to the number of households that are offered service. So there's slightly different terminology depending on the context that we're talking about. But here we're using it to reflect the percentage of the households in California that subscribe. The interesting thing here is that this data was gathered at the street address level, the most granular data you can get, but it was presented at not quite that amount of accuracy in order to allay some of the competitive concerns in this voluntary effort. And so the areas shown are slightly larger around the edges than the actual street level data. If I could contrast that to the next page, well, let me tell you the next page, actually, and I don't have a big map for that, but in your handout, there's a three-color map that categorizes this availability into served, unserved, and underserved areas of the state. And the definition of underserved is one adopted by the Commission, and it means that service is underserved if it's less than 3 megabits per second download or 1 megabit per second upload speed. That's underserved. It's basically, you have broadband service, but it's not as fast as we'd like it to be these days to do a lot of the applications that are popular. And then if you turn to the next page, the page is almost all green, if I can get the next map put up. That actually is a map of broadband availability using the data we get specified under DIVCA. And that's specified on a census tract basis. So that if broadband's available in a census tract, basically you mark the whole tract as being served. And census tracts, particularly in rural areas, can be really big in California. And that's why, if you look at this kind of map, it basically shows almost all of the state being served. Now, when we measure the number of households under even all that green, that's about 99%. So you can see the difference between that and the previous map I showed that is much smaller is 96%. And I suspect the actual number is something slightly less than 96%, and we're hopefully going to get to that in the next iteration of maps, which I'll talk to you about now. The Recovery Act, the stimulus bill, had money in it for broadband deployment issues, and among that was $350 million in broadband mapping money. The NTIA, National Telecommunications and Information Administration, has a program of mapping grants. The governors of each state are to designate a single entity in the state eligible for those grants, and the governor of California designated the PUC as that eligible entity. We applied for a grant and were issued a grant last October of $2.3 million to collect and map broadband availability. And so that involves collecting data from all broadband providers in the state, which is a slightly bigger universe than just the state video franchisees. So that data is at the census block level, and that's really important in this process in terms of getting a handle on where broadband is and isn't. There are about 10,000 census blocks in each census tract. So if you look at that map there and understand that a lot of it's colored in because the census tracts, the area that we're going to look at discretely really shrinks under the data we're getting under the NTIA grant. And it's by blocks for really small blocks of 2 miles or less, 2 square miles or less. For bigger blocks, we actually are getting data by street segment, certain range of addresses along a road. So in the rural areas where the problem really exists, we'll have much better data that'll help guide our various policies that Jack Lutz is going to talk about later, programs to stimulate deployment. So I have on the following pages some statistics that show this is subscribership. This one that's a bar chart that shows all broadband connections in California. This is actually data from the FCC. They've collected broadband data that we have access to, and you'll see that it shows about 8.75 million households in California subscribe to broadband data. That number actually went down slightly between 2007 and 2008. I think that's because I believe the FCC just started collecting broadband data by census tract. Prior to that, it was a statewide number. And anytime you do that, you change systems that these numbers come out of, the data comes out of, and there's a little adjustment when you shift the basis by which data is being collected. So we, on the other hand, looking at the next page, this chart is the broadband subscribership data that we've collected under DIVCA, and this is only for the video franchisees in California, both state franchisees and local franchisees. And we show there that there are 7.9 million households subscribing, which is 62% of the households in California. So that's about 90% of the total reported to the FCC, indicating that about 10% of the broadband subscribers in the state subscribe to something other than a service from a cable company. But even so, that growth you'll see in penetration from end of 2007 to end of 2008 was almost 13% in broadband. And the line below that is mobile broadband from smartphones and air cards and so forth. And that increased 133% over that period. And
I'll just interrupt you with a quick question here.
Yeah.
I want to get to your end of your presentation and then jump into questions.
2 more pages and that's it.
So I have a netbook with a broadband card.
Yes.
I won't say which company.
Yeah.
They know who they are. So which category is that considered? That's
in the
residential
wireless.
wireline, right?
Yeah.
So aside from a BlackBerry, that's another type
That's
of
in that mobile broadband wireless.
Okay.
And there, yes. And I say penetration, and that's really a misnomer. because that's calculated on the number of subscribers, again, over the number of households, and the number of households really doesn't apply when you're talking about wireless, because you can easily have more than one subscriber in a home and so forth. But still, we kept that denominator the same to give some kind of comparison. And then finally, a couple of pie charts that show, the first one really shows the competition in broadband between the various industries. And you'll see that the phone companies, which offer primarily DSL service and fiber to the home, are slightly ahead. They're running neck and neck in terms of the percentage of the customers the cable folks and the phone companies serve in California. And the next set of charts shows the download speeds that customers subscribe to in California. And we concluded that 58% of the residential broadband connections have speeds higher than 3 megabits down, and that 30% have speeds higher than 6 megabits down. And that's the end of 2008. We're getting into really an inflection point, I think, in speeds offered, and it's going to be very interesting to track those speeds and what people actually subscribe to over the next couple of years. So that, I think, explains the picture from broadband availability point and subscribership that we've been gathering in terms of data from the video franchises, and I'd be happy to answer questions that you might have.
Great. I appreciate it. We do have several. Let me introduce. I've been joined by not only Senator Dutton, but Senator Alan Lowenthal. I don't know if either of you had some initial comments you wanted to make or questions for this panel. Let me jump into a couple, because the main point of the first panel was to really look at a map and analyze sort of build out. How aggressive are we making this available to what parts of the state? Mm-hmm. From a policy perspective, we're hoping that everybody has access, not just based on sheer equity, but knowing that it's good for the economy. I think PPIC had a report just last month drawing the direct correlation between broadband availability and economic benefit or economic development as a result. So when the Broadband Task Force report was released a couple of years ago, it started off with the premise that 96% of Californians have access to broadband. Are we still at 96%? Has it improved from 96%, or have we slipped backwards from 96%?
Well, I don't think we've slipped backwards. I think we're moving forward. And if you go again to this map, you'll see that there are solid shaded areas, and those are the areas that were shown by the Broadband Task Force as being served at the time. And then there's color areas with the same colors but showing the speeds, but in hash marks. And those areas that are shown with hash marks represent just the applicants that have been granted advanced service grants by the Public Utilities Commission, and we have that fund, and Jack will talk about this more, of $100 million. And that shows the really rural areas predominantly that have been given grants that just through that program have expanded.
So if we're still at roughly 96%, then I guess the two follow-up questions are, number one, what does 96% really cover? And therefore the conversation about the served versus unserved
right.
versus underserved.
Exactly.
You mentioned 3 megabits as sort of the standard. Is that sort of a PUC standard? Is that a national standard? Is that an internationally recognized standard?
That was the standard that the Commission adopted for the purposes of issuing grants with the CASF program. And as you see, I have a figure about the percentage of Californians who subscribe at speeds over, I think it was 58%, over 3 megabits per second. The technology is moving rapidly, much faster than that, and the companies, I'm sure, will talk about that their deployment of really super fast services and the market reaction to those. But the Federal Communications Commission is about to release a national broadband plan. And that's due in March. And that will set national goals.
Now due in March. It was
due in February.
We won't get into that.
Now due in March. That'll set a national goal, people think, for, the speeds that we'd like to see available on a broad basis in California. And I think...
and I recognize that it's evolving. What was considered high speed, 4 years ago, is not what we would consider high speed today, and I'd argue in 5 years from now. Exactly. So we know we're sort of racing to keep up here.
Well, it's as the bandwidth is available, more bandwidth-intensive services are thought of and developed, and as those get popular, it puts pressure on having more broadband capacity.
The way I describe it is there's a chicken and the egg, and then there's the bandwidth and the app. Right? And they chase each other for constant improvement. But I think it comes back to begging the question of service level or quality of connection, if you will, being made available to all parts of the state. So that's one sort of follow-up line of thought, if you will, from your 96%. The other is the methodology by which you count. And you went through a couple of methodologies here, from a census tract information to census block information. When do we anticipate that census block information to be finalized? And what's your hunch on whether that 96% number stays static, goes up, or goes down?
So we're getting better at gathering data and the methods of gathering data. We've now, as pursuant to this NTIA grant, we're to collect this data 2 times a year, at least for 2 years, and possibly 3 years after that if they extend the program. And so we've gathered the data now. It's moving into a verification stage, and we'll get that data off to the NTIA for a national map in March. But we, as part of this grant, will be developing an online, interactive, a web-based broadband availability map that will that anyone can have access to over the web. They'll be able to put in their address, get a list of providers who serve in that area, and the speeds, maximum speeds that are offered. So that'll also show in a kind of very detailed way what's not served and what's served at lower speeds, and that'll help inform public policy and let us know how far we have to go in this goal of getting broadband deployed in California. Also help with the grant process to the extent that kind of money, public money, will be necessary to achieve that deployment. So I think that online map will be available this summer, and that'll give you a lot of tools on your desktop for you to be able to look at these issues.
Okay. Remember when the Broadband Task Force report came out?
January of 2008.
Okay. So it's been
sound right?
About 2 years. And if we're still at 96%, the good news is we haven't gone backwards, but the bad news is if we're still not significantly beyond where we were 2 years ago.
I think we probably are. It's hard to measure with that kind of amount of precision, partly because, the last time we had an actual count of households in California was in the 2000 census. And what you have to do between then and now is project the number of households, and that's not an exact science. Mm-hmm. So we'll really get a reset of those numbers with the 2010 census.
That's good to know. I hadn't heard that.
That'll be very helpful.
Okay. Senator Dutton?
Yeah, and taking a look at all these maps and everything, one of the challenges that we obviously have here in California is because of some of the terrain that we're having to deal with. Sometimes these maps can be somewhat misleading until you start looking at a topo map, which is the two-color one here. But because, frankly, when you start taking a look at this, we're doing a fairly good job in kind of the flatland areas, things like this. But where we're running into some challenges is obviously when you get into the higher elevations and the mountain areas and so forth, a little tough to do wireless. Even satellite sometimes is tough. You have to be in a particular location. Running running the infrastructure in order to do cable access and stuff. I mean, that's kind of tough too. So it almost seems like we need another way to kind of look at this, because some of these underserved areas are underserved because, frankly, you're not even ever going to build on them even.
Well, it's very challenging geography, very low density in a lot of cases, and it would be inordinately expensive. I mean, you can do it with subsidies, but do you want to have the subsidies to put fiber to these, very low density areas? So a lot of my opinion, a lot of the solution to the broadband problem of availability in those kind of areas is going to be wireless, and the provision of service by Wi-Fi and WiMAX, kind of high-speed wireless technologies, they're not, by and large, they're not reflected in the numbers that go into that 96% thing. Those companies, a lot of those companies operate with unlicensed spectrum, and has not been, until now, there's not been a lot of effort to gather data from those providers. They aren't franchised or licensed by the FCC or by us. They're a little bit difficult to identify. One of the things we've done with this NTI grant is make a lot of effort to reach out to those kinds of companies and get service data from them. So when you say, gee, have we made progress, that's certainly one of the areas that's made progress that can be rapidly deployed, that there's a lot of investment going into, and I don't know if there's anyone in the room today that is in that business, but that's where a lot of the progress is going to be from. And also satellite service, which now is a little bit slow and a little bit expensive, but the next generation of satellites will provide like 10 megabit service and probably be a very cost-effective way of reaching those areas. Also, the small LECs, I think, are going to be talking today, and they're, this all goes to the amount of investment people are making, and I think you're going to hear more information
today. We'll talk about that at that appropriate panel.
Yes.
One last comment, one last question, and then we'll move on. The last comment being, I'm glad to hear you say we're going to be getting more information in this wireless arena. I don't know if that's voluntary information or that we just now have resources and a way to get it, because I have been hearing anecdotally, more and more people, their first broadband connection is with a smartphone, but great stories. Love to see some hard data on that too, and try to understand what that means. Last question is, so this 96%, let's assume, let's accept the assumptions in the methodology for a minute. How does that rank California with the rest of the nation?
Well, that's a difficult question because California is way ahead of the rest of the nation in terms of this kind of mapping. Right. And so we'll know with this NTIA project, all the states are going to be doing this kind of data collection and mapping, and it's going to all roll together in a national broadband map.
The broadband plan we expect from FCC any day now, will that have at least a first cut at all 50 states and what their deployment rate is?
I doubt it. It's possible. They may. But the FCC actually gathers not deployment information, but they gather subscriber information.
Okay.
So they probably will have information about that, but it's really going to take the data that the NTIA is collecting about availability put together with the data that the FCC is collecting about subscribership to give the whole picture.
Okay. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Let's welcome Senator Rod Wright to the committee. Senator Wright, we just finished the deployment and mapping segment of the informational hearing. We're getting ready for the investment panel. And let me just sort of announce once again, for those of you who just tuned in, we're conducting the informational hearing component of today's hearing first, and we'll do consideration of bills afterwards. Will Jack Lutzer from the PUC, Phyllis White from the Division of Ratepayer Advocates, Dave Clark from Sebastian Corporation, Bill Devine from AT&T, Kurt Rasmussen from Verizon, and Carolyn McIntyre from the Cable Television Association, please come forward. We'll add a couple of chairs here.
Yes.
And I know you have a lot to say, but let me ask you guys to aim for about 5 minutes each so we can leave sufficient time for question and answer. And I know the industry folks are eager to say how they put their money where their mouth is on this. Let's go ahead and start.
Yes, good morning, Chairman Padilla and Senators. I'm Jack Lutza, and I'm the Director of the Communications Division at the California Public Utilities Commission. And among my responsibilities is managing a number of programs the Commission has adopted, some in response to legislation that create broadband investment opportunities in California. And I'll briefly summarize the programs that the California Public Utilities Commission is making available and answer questions that people might have. The first program on your list in today's schedule is the California Emerging Technology Fund. And the California Emerging Technology Fund is actually not a PUC-run program, but it is a program that the Commission established when 4 of the major California telecommunications companies merged into 2 entities in 2005. As a result of the merger of SBC and AT&T and the merger of Verizon and MCI, the Commission directed those companies as part of their merger to make available $60 million of shareholder funds for a period of 5 years for the purpose of achieving ubiquitous access to broadband and advanced services in California. The Commission set up the structure of this nonprofit corporation. The corporation has incorporated under the laws of the state of California, and since late 2005, the CETF has focused its agenda on developing broadband access in rural areas of California for urban low-income customers and the disabled population of the state of California. Among the accomplishments that they listed in their 2009 report to the Commission are the fact that they worked on and coordinated 44 entities who requested $35 million worth of grants from the NTIA, the National Telecommunications Information Agency, under the National Recovery Act program. They launched a major public awareness campaign among these populations in California called Get Connected to talk about the benefits, both social and economic, of broadband awareness. They've funded the California Information and Technology Survey in 2009, which was conducted by the California Public Policy Institute. And working with a number of applicants in rural areas, they assisted them in developing applications for one of the programs I'm going to talk about, the California Advanced Services Fund. And they coordinated efforts for 20 entities to help them be successful at the California Public Utilities Commission. In addition to those particular activities, the CETF works closely with local government entities and private-public consortia in the rural parts of California to estimate broadband demand and try to target areas that might be suitable for broadband development. We at the Commission are required by law to report annually on the activities of the CETF, and we recently filed our 2009 report with the legislature. I'm going to move now into a program which the Commission directly manages and created in recent years called the California Advanced Services Fund, which the Commission set up to make over a 2-year period $100 million over a 2-year period so that entities could apply for grants for broadband development in unserved and underserved areas of California. My colleague, Michael Morris, mentioned that for the purposes of the Advanced Services Fund, the Commission adopted an underserved standard at 3 megabits download and 1 megabit upload, which at the time was considered to be the threshold above which people considered speeds adequate to meet modern broadband standards. But as Mr. Morris mentioned, the standard is always changing, and if the program does continue in the future, it's possible that the Commission might adopt another threshold. The Advanced Services Fund is in the handout, which I think you just received. And the decision that the Commission rendered at the end of 2007 set up criteria by which people would apply for grants and directed the staff in my division on how to evaluate grant proposals. And in order to make grant information available to competitors, potential other project proponents, the staff receives applications from applicants, reviews them based on the criteria of cost in general terms, the number of households served, the type of technology used, and then we release the recommendation to fund a grant through the Commission process of a resolution in which the public gets to review the proposed grants for 30 days.
I appreciate the thoroughness of the information.
Okay.
Let's try not to get too much into the weeds here.
Okay.
The reason I wanted the overview of the Emerging Technologies Fund, Advanced Services Fund, and to the extent that you can share information on the Recovery Act dollars is, to dot the I's and cross the T's here. It's not just having these goals of broadband deployment and adoption throughout the state, but look, frankly, a big chunk of this is going to happen, if it's going to happen, with private investment. But the state of California, through a couple of mechanisms, is also putting public monies where our mouth is. And so that's what we're hoping to get from you in a summarized form.
Okay. I will cut to the chase and say that as of January this year, the Commission approved 41 of these projects. And the amount committed to the projects is about $85 million. It covers 26,000 square miles of California that was previously unserved or underserved. And the households that will have broadband access as a result is about 295,000 households. The program still has money available that we can give between now and early next year, and we're still in the process of reviewing a number of grants. This Advanced Services Fund opportunity precedes the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, or what we refer to as the Recovery Act. And as a result of the federal program, California actually changed its program from providing 40% of a project's funding with 60% investor financing to an opportunity where applicants who have applied or plan to apply for Recovery Act grants can get, which allows up to 80% funding of a particular project. The California program is now synchronized with the Recovery Act, and we can, or made available to applicants, 10% of the total project fund, which means that a project proponent only needs to finance 10% of a program or a project themselves. I have a map there that describes the footprint of areas that are served by grants that have been approved by the Commission, either through our 40% grant funding in the California program or by Recovery Act grants. And I will say that the California Recovery Act grant proposals, we've made a number of 10% contingent grants, assuming that projects would be funded. And through the first round of the Recovery Act, only 2 projects have been funded in California with federal money. Neither, and one of them was for the city of Los Angeles, which was a $5 million or so grant, and then there was another project for the West Central Valley in the Fresno, north and south of Fresno on the west side of the valley. That was was also a large Recovery Act grant. And that project at this point did not receive California funds, although staff and that project proponent are talking about getting money from the California program.
Okay. Let me ask you just sort of one bottom line question, then we do need to move on here. Of the awards that have been given to the state, can you quantify how much we're chipping away at this 4% of Californians that at the point of release of the Broadband Task Force report were not served?
The projects, for the most part, except for two, are not operational now. They're under development, but the 290-some thousand households that are potentially served by grants in California may address as much as half of the unserved households that were identified in the Broadband Task Force report. So it was more than 500,000 households in that 4%, and this may address a large number of households that don't. But the projects, because of the terrain that they serve and seasonal building cycles and so forth, are mostly under development with CEQA review and that kind of thing, and we expect that over the next 2 years they'll be put in operation.
Okay. We'll look forward to tracking it and hearing direct results. Next witness, please.
Senators, I'm Phyllis White, Deputy Director of the Division of Ratepayer Advocates.
May I ask you to pull that microphone much closer to you? Thank you.
DRA is the Independent Consumer Advocacy Division of the PUC, with a statutory mandate to obtain the lowest possible rate for utility service consistent with reliable and safe service levels. We fully support the economic and social goals that will be furthered by broadband expansion. We want to ensure broadband expansion occurs at a most cost-effective fashion. And we have three general areas of concern, as outlined in the one-pager that you have, I believe, at this point. I will speak to each of them in turn. First, adequate project information and public disclosure. Applications are reviewed confidentially with few, if any, published standards or requirements. The public has little to no opportunity to review or to comment on grants before they are awarded or denied. And applications are not required to make public significant project details such as labor and materials or construction milestones. In creating the CASF, the PUC expressed its concern that making the application public would reveal sensitive market information. Consequently, only Commission staff may review applications, and only the census block group and maps of the proposed service areas are posted to the Commission's website. Further, only persons on the proceeding list are noticed of the staff's recommendations to the Commissioners, and as such, only persons on the proceeding list have opportunity to provide comment on funding recommendations. DRA, being part of the Commission, is allowed to see complete applications, but we are barred from sharing any information with other parties or the public. We also may not reveal any information that we obtain from the applications in our comments. In creating the CASF, the Commission assumed there would be multiple bids for each service area. It counted on competition to keep project costs low. In fact, however, 2 years and more than 41 approved projects later, only one project has had a competing bid. The lack of competition for these funds must be acknowledged, because in the absence of competition, in the absence of public comment, and in the absence of transparency and public disclosure, there is no other mechanism to control costs. There is no other mechanism to ensure that proposed projects will be developed at the least possible cost. Second, insufficient accountability. There is no opportunity for handling concerns or complaints after award is granted. There are weak or non-existent cost-effectiveness criteria. There's no third-party independent review of project viability and no independent performance reviews of financial audit of the projects. DRA is concerned that the grants are awarded in a closed process. The SB 1193 audit and report requirements pertain to the implementation and effectiveness of the overall CASF program, not the viability of individual projects funded by the program. Certainly, the Commission's guidelines do require recipients to submit invoices at various points of construction and require a final report at completion. These progress reports, however, are by awardees to Commission staff. There being no third-party review, there is no opportunity for verification or any check and balance on these progress reports. Moreover, only Commission staff can see the reports. Per Commission order, the information is confidential, never subject to public scrutiny.
Okay. I know you have a third area of accessibility.
Yes.
If you can describe that briefly, and let me just say, I'm authoring a bill this year that would extend and expand the Advanced Services Fund, so I'd love to work with you to address some of this.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I just want to point out, too, that these progress reports are not formal audits in any respect. And as such, current provisions do not ensure that the applicants are, in fact, doing what they said that they would do. DRA finds problematic Commission language that states invoices, quote, will be subject to financial audit at any time within 3 years of completion of the work. It's not clear what the Commission's intent is by subject to. Can DRA and others who have the public interest in mind rely on there being financial audits within 3 years of grant award? Or should the public be concerned that after 3 years, award recipients never again need to fear a financial audit? Lastly, my third point, limited expectations on grant recipients. There is no guarantee that services will or even should be provided on request to everyone in the service area. Awards may, in fact, allow high installation charges and fees that discourage adoption. There is insufficient commitment to serve low-income and working poor, and projects are provided that propose speeds below the already low CASF benchmark. DRA believes public subsidies should favor the neediest constituents. However, the CASF program doesn't prioritize low-income communities. The criteria allows 5 of 100 points for projects in low-income areas. DRA believes also that public subsidies should buy higher speeds. We want tomorrow's speeds, not speeds barely adequate for today's purposes. The experience, however, is that projects are being approved that don't even satisfy the 3 megabits per second downstream and 1 megabit per second upstream benchmark. The program is paying for low speeds at premium prices. My 2 last points are to illustrate that there are insufficient assurances that the projects will, in fact, increase availability. Project requests are ranging from the hundreds of dollars per household to the many thousands of dollars per household. Applications are approved, awards made. Meanwhile, there have been no analysis or explanation as to why funding might vary so widely. Installation and service fees also tend to vary over a wide range and too often are so high that DRA feels they may be a barrier to adoption by the persons intended to benefit from the public-funded projects. And again, there's been no analysis. What makes $149 installation fee acceptable? And why is it acceptable for service fees to range up to $200 per month? In closing, DRA's recommendations to remedy current and any future broadband grant programs include 3 areas. Transparency. Require grant applications.
Ma'am, I really hate to cut you off, but we do have the handout that I think you're reading from in front of us, so,
Yes, so
we will take it to heart. If I can sum you up,
Yes.
you believe with the goals,
Yes.
you agree with the goals, but believe there's a better way to run the program
That's
that
right.
includes more transparency, accountability, and accessibility.
Thank you. That's right.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Next witness.
Good morning. My name is David Clark, and I'm the regulatory manager for Sebastian. Sebastian is proud to be a member of a great group of small companies that have been dedicated to bringing high-quality, affordable services to customers in California for over 100 years. The California Independent Telephone Companies, or CITC, is composed of 13 small companies ranging in size from Pinnacles with only a few hundred access lines up to Sierra, which has almost 25,000 access lines. Sebastian operates two of these companies, Kerman Telephone and Forest Hill Telephone. In addition, Sebastian operates one of the two companies in California to receive ARRA funding to date. The CITC companies recognize the importance of evolving to a broadband platform and are in favor of mechanisms which support and promote development of this infrastructure, such as CETF, CASF, ARRA, and USF. CITC companies and their national associations have been advocating policies related to broadband conversion for some time, focusing on transition recovery and support mechanisms. As original providers of universal service for voice, the rural companies would like to continue the tradition of providers of a universal available broadband service. CITC members serve rural high-cost areas where customer affordability is an issue. The small companies are in the best position to provide both voice and broadband service in our areas. These areas are traditionally where no one else wanted to serve because of the costs involved. The most cost-effective means to provide broadband service in rural high-cost areas is to provide broadband and voice service over a single joint facility. This facility currently provides voice and broadband service in a fully regulated environment. Note that unlike some of the larger and competitive companies, our broadband services are completely subject to regulation and review. Given the high cost of service in these rural areas, support mechanisms must be available to promote the affordable deployment of broadband service to CITC's rural customers. Viable business plans offering affordable service to customers are only possible if there's a sufficient and predictable funding support mechanism in place and where regulatory mechanisms work in tandem with the support funding to promote incentives to invest. For small companies, this means inclusion in rate of return requirements. Legislative and regulatory directives are currently sending mixed signals to our companies related to broadband investment. On one hand, we are asked to expand availability and increase service speeds, and on the other hand, we're told these investments are not recoverable in our revenue requirement. Broadband funding initiatives from a CITC perspective must be evaluated in relation to this rate of return recovery. The CPUC policy has been that investment for broadband or made with partial grant funding cannot be included in rate base recovery by CITC companies. A 40% grant does not provide a viable business plan if there's no means for recovery of the other 60% of the costs. We believe this lack of a means to recover the other 60% of the costs is why so few CASF applications were made prior to ARRA funding, and why ARRA funding requests have been for 80 to 90% of the cost of the project. As long as investments associated with broadband service is excluded from our rate of return process, investments will likely not be made. This approach to cost recovery for broadband investments in CITC service areas is limiting broadband deployment in these areas. This includes decisions that have failed and continue to fail to take advantage of universal service funding, which constitutes free money to the state, which could be utilized to provide joint broadband and voice services in small company areas. We hope and believe that most of these rate of return issues have been addressed in Assembly Bill 1555, which was passed last year. We will see that with the upcoming round of rate cases. Finally, I would like to discuss several general considerations for the grant system, which should be reviewed with regards to their application and compatibility with other mechanisms. First, given the high cost in rural areas, there should be only one provider supported. CSF funding should be focused on getting service to unserved customers and not promote competition where service already exists. Second, CASF should support the use of federal funding sources and be consistent with these mechanisms, including ARRA and USF. Third, grants must be fully and completely evaluated to ensure that a sustainable business plan exists. Funding provided to construct a network that will not be useful if the entity cannot afford to operate it jeopardizes both customers as well as scarce resources. And finally, we think that you should recognize the importance of the underlying facilities in delivering broadband services. Customers' applications utilizing the network are only useful if there is a network. The financial means of developing and maintaining that network must continue to exist in order for these over-the-top functions to have meaning. Basically, that's my presentation. Thank you for letting me talk this morning.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, good morning. My name is Bill Devine, and I represent AT&T. You've heard from both the PUC and some of the companies today about efforts to extend broadband throughout California. I'd like to provide you with some specifics about what AT&T is doing to make broadband available throughout the state. We currently provide wireline broadband service to more than 90% of our California service territory. And through an agreement we have with Wild Blue Satellite, we are able to extend broadband service throughout the entire state of California. We continue to invest in our California networks to bring new fiber closer to the communities and enhance the broadband services that we offer. Our UVerse build-out, which I will talk about in further detail later in this hearing, is part of our effort to bring a faster broadband speed to our customers. From 2007 through 2009, AT&T's total capital investment in its California networks was nearly $7.3 billion. AT&T offers 5 different wireline broadband speeds depending upon the location of the customer and the needs of the customer. Our entry-level service begins at $20 a month, and we offer speeds upwards of 18 megs in California. These options offer a wide array of choice for California families. In the most remote areas of our service territory, where our traditional wireline broadband is not available, customers do have the satellite option that we make available. While today's hearing focuses on wireline broadband service availability, we believe it's also important to recognize broadband markets are moving and where Californians are putting their communication dollars. In the United States, and California is leading the way, new broadband subscribers are choosing wireless broadband over other broadband options by a very wide margin. From 2007 through 2009, AT&T invested $1.5 billion in our wireless network to meet the exploding demand of wireless broadband capability. In 2008, the most recent full year of data available, 76% of all new broadband subscribers chose wireless. Wireless data traffic on our network has grown more than 5,000% in 3 years. In fact, 40% of AT&T's wireless customers today are using smartphones. The computer is moving from the desktop to the pockets of Californians. We agree that promoting access and availability of wireline broadband is an important policy goal, and we support that goal as we supported the creation of the CISF fund, and we participate in a small way in that fund. But we are also investing more than $1 billion in the wireless network and adding thousands of Wi-Fi hotspots throughout California as well as around the United States. As a result of the significant investments that we have made, and frankly we believe our competitors are making, we are offering California consumers a wide variety of choices. Choices where they receive their broadband, either in the home, through their mobile device, or at the thousands of hotspots. Choices in the speed and the price they pay for their broadband, and choices in the devices they choose to use, whether it's the desktop, a laptop, a notebook, or a smartphone. AT&T's investments bring high-speed internet access to California, and we will continue to expand those investments. And we believe California consumers are benefiting today and will continue to benefit into the future. Thanks for the opportunity to testify. We'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good morning, Chairman Padilla and members of the committee. My name is Kurt Rasmussen, and I thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning. I know you're interested in investment, so I will move forward into my comments to that point. In the past 2 years, Verizon has invested $1.3 billion in capital outlays in its network. The vast majority of that is directed towards our Fios product and other digital services. Our investment in both fiber-based and copper-based services has brought broadband availability to just over 87% of our entire California footprint. With our FiOS rollout covers approximately 40% of our service territory, and within that 40%, we have 100% broadband availability in multiple speed tiers, some of which are substantially higher than what would be considered the minimum. There are pockets within Verizon's territory where we do not have broadband rolled out. Those are predominantly the rural and very high-cost areas. And the stumbling block in those areas, or the hurdle that we have to get over, is the backhaul cost. They're very remote. It costs a lot of money to bring the internet back to a point of connection. And that is generally the stumbling block and what makes these projects uneconomic. And it's exactly the conditions that Senator Dutton pointed out, the mountainous, the remote, weather, etc., that make those projects difficult. In these areas, in several of these areas, we have taken advantage of the California Advanced Services Fund. Those include the town of Piñon near Palm Springs and also the Sea Ranch community along the north coast. We just recently were awarded a grant to serve that area. And in contrast with the comments of Ms. White, we received extensive public input and review on that project. I mean, we got numerous letters. The Commission got numerous letters on that project. We also had involvement from 2 competitors who were in the area. They provided comment to the Commission, so I'm not sure it's accurate to say that there is not public and competitor input into that process. At least that's been Verizon's experience. These projects, when completed, will provide service to approximately 600 new households. Verizon has chosen not to pursue ERA funding, although several other organizations and groups have submitted grants to the federal government for ERA funding, and the one that is I think the most dramatic and certainly the largest is the one that you can see on the map that Mr. Lutza used, and it is that entire red band. The project proposes to provide service from roughly Barstow in the high desert all the way to the Gardnerville area in Nevada. And it will provide an internet backbone and provide retail internet services along the entire eastern Sierra. So that is predominantly our service territory. That is an area that we could not have done this. I mean, so the ERA funding has the potential to come through and build a project that we just simply could not build. There's another element of the ERA stimulus plan that I think is important, and that is the mapping that Michael Morris talked about. And without adequate mapping, it's hard to target solutions. And I think the Commission's doing a good job. We're cooperating. We're providing the data to them. So that effort is well underway. In fact, in our Sea Ranch application, we used some older maps to form our application, and it turns out that they did not actually represent the broadband that was available. It was more extensively available than we were able to discern, so we had to subsequently reduce the size of that grant. So we very much support the mapping efforts that the Commission has undertaken. I think in summary, broadband investment has been robust. I believe it will continue to be robust. There are multiple competitors in multiple different delivery technologies, everybody competing for market share and competing for market leadership and service quality leadership. So I see the market continuing to be robust. There are areas that are problematic, there are areas that are uneconomic, and there are both federal and state programs in place that will help us and others target those areas. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Carolyn McIntyre on behalf of the California Cable and Telecommunications Association. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee today. Our industry is leading the nation in broadband. Our cable broadband service is available to 92% of U.S. households and 100% of California households that cable passes. The industry has invested more than $146 billion in infrastructure since 1996. $20 billion of that alone is in California. And I should note that since 2006, that investment has been about $6.6 billion. Our industry is a key driver to California's national economic growth and recovery by contributing to communities across the United States. The cable's private capital investments have created an industry that supports over 1.5 million workers. And according to DIVCA, as the information is shown today, over 18,000 workers in California. That does not include workers that we do business with outside of those that are directly employed by the industry. The next deployment of next generation technology for us is the wideband, where we're looking to launch into the 100 megabits era. We already have service providers in California that are providing service at greater than 50 megabits. Specifically, with regards to investment, as I indicated, the industry does in fact provide broadband service to 100% of the customers that are passed by cable. We have invested $20 billion since 1996, 6.6 since 2006, and have contributed significantly to state and local economies through the payment of taxes and fees and philanthropic contributions that we make. Lastly, because I don't want to limit the comments to regarding our investments to just infrastructure, the industry has invested in numerous programs to bring broadband service to low-income communities. We have a national program underway called Adoption Plus, that will focus on bringing broadband service to 3.5 million middle school children. We'll be looking at those schools that offer programs to the national lunch service program that provides meals to low-income families, and partnering with schools and the federal government to the extent funding is made available to, in fact, provide those services. So thank you for the opportunity to address the committee.
Thank you all for very, very helpful information. Now begins our questions. Thought you were going to get away that quick. But let me introduce Senator Wright, who's joined the committee, and give him first shot.
A couple. A concern that I would have, and listening to some of you, was a question I raised, is if we're watching an industry move to a wireless network, should the government spend a dime trying to wire houses with a hardwire line? If you're watching the growth go this way, why should we spend any money doing the other?
I guess I'd like to answer that for a couple of reasons. One, I think especially in rural areas that wireless solution doesn't work very well. When you go up into Forest Hill, you have to basically go mark an X on the lawn because that's the only place you can get any wireless recovery because of the mountainous region and terrain. That doesn't really work very well. The second thing is, and my understanding is that there still is a limit on what you can get from a wireless system, that there's only so much capacity you can put on that. And that capacity tends to be shared as well. So that as we get more people on this wireless network, you're going to have continued congestion problems. You'll have continued issues with ability to provide anything. And I also think that there is an upper limit on what you can ultimately get out of that wireless system.
But the problem, though, is every system has constraints. If I'm on a cable platform, if everybody in my neighborhood is watching their television, and if a number of people are on, the system gets slower because you've only got so much capacity. If I'm further away from the service office, then DSL gets slower because, again, physics doesn't really care about what we want to do. The question I'm raising is that if we're investing millions of dollars in subsidizing a service today, we had the high cost fund that we did for telephone because 25 years ago there were clearly no options that were available. And we were doing radio telephones back then to service rural areas. But as you're watching the marketplace change, as the ORA representative was suggesting, are we investing public dollars in technology that's virtually obsolete by the time that it's deployed?
And I would say that if you're investing fiber to the home, you're not. Because that fiber to the home doesn't share that capacity. It's not the same as a coax cable kind of infrastructure. The fiber to the home, I think, has a dedicated fiber to the customer from the central office, and that doesn't have that sharing problem that you're talking about existing. And as far as I know, there is still capacity beyond. We're talking about 100 megabits today, and that there's a potential for that to even increase further as technology develops and it makes that available.
But see, let me say something. Is the problem in poorer communities, in your estimation, is it choice or what's available to be had? My experience is that a lot of people don't have broadband that have it available because there's not much on the system that they want to pay for. So the fact that you make it available in Compton doesn't mean that you're going to have a high take rate, because most of what people do on broadband is not really being done that often in Compton. Whereas I got a whole lot of people that have cell phones. I have a whole lot of people who have smartphones, because the use and the ubiquitous nature of that phone makes people want to pay for it. I don't have that many people in Compton who buy broadband, even though it's available.
And I believe that'll probably change, especially as you go into things like IPTV and get some of the video provided on that same one line to the customer's house. I don't think people are going to want to watch a 2-inch screen on their cell phone, at least not when they're watching the Super Bowl or something where they have, where they want to be entertained for a non-mobile kind of event. Those things, I think, will be limited in what you can do from a wireless solution.
Well, but again, not just wireless. The rationale that we had when we created the high-cost fund, when we created the other means of subsidy, the concern that I have is that when you draw the line where the subsidy is, that means that you increase the marginal cost for everybody else who doesn't qualify. So indirectly, you're almost pushing some people away while you're providing the service to other people. So again, the question becomes, is it a wise use of the public dollar to create the subsidy for a service that is often non-selected by the people to whom it was available? You're right. If I have cable, for the most part in California, I've got a coaxial cable. Some of them are converting to fiber, but that's expensive. If in fact you're building fiber, to the RA person's question, perhaps we should only subsidize the construction of fiber, so that at least as the technology advances, you'll have the platform to grow. But as the AT&T representative explained, if you're moving into a wireless network anyway, are we building a system that ultimately will become obsolete in the near term, and you've taken those public dollars and built something that doesn't ultimately provide long-term value, if that's the direction that the market's moving? If I took your argument, for example, about, say, satellite broadcast, it wasn't too long ago that they couldn't even broadcast a local television signal. They can now. It wasn't too long ago that there were a number of restrictions that caused us to shield them from competition that go back to 1996. Those are no longer the cases because you're watching the technology advance. But the question is the investment of the government grant keeping pace with the advancement of the technology? And should the government, in fact, back out and let the marketplace handle this effort?
Senator Wright, in developing the Advanced Services Fund, technology neutrality and the many changes you're talking about were important to the Commission, and it is possible for wireless projects to receive grants from the CASF program. And on the map of programs that we've approved, there's a combination of last mile projects, which would be either wireless signals or wires to an end user in a home or a business. And there are a number of projects, especially the big red stripe that Kurt Rasmussen talked about, which are middle mile projects, which develop backbone networks so that a variety of technologies in their end use application can be made available for broadband services. So we agree that selecting a particular type of technology is not what we are trying to do with this program.
Okay.
Thank you. Welcome, Senator Kehoe. Just to bring you up to speed, we just heard from the investment panel on the agenda. We've gone through the mapping element, and we're sort of wrapping up some Q&A. Interesting questions raised by Senator Wright. I'm not sure I understand. I'm not sure I completely agree. And let me point out a distinction, one by both a question and a comment. The comment being, if there was no future in some form of landline, I'm not sure we would see the level of investment from both Verizon and AT&T on their fiber to the home or fiber to near the home offerings, if you will. Another thing that I've sort of had to learn and correct myself a couple of years ago and point out to friends, we tend to use the term broadband and high-speed internet access almost interchangeably, when broadband, in fact, is really sort of a technological capability of the pipe, if you will, or that line coming into the home. The UVerse product, the Fios product, is something made possible over a broadband connection. High speeds of internet access is something made over a broadband connection. So, some of your constituents, Senator Wright, some of my in Compton, some of my constituents in Pacoima would like this tremendously impressive technological video product. It comes over a broadband line. I may not be doing a video and high-speed internet access bundle or package that I pay for every month, but nonetheless, it is a broadband category connection being made available in neighborhoods, and I think that's part of what we're talking about, making broadband available. Now, what people choose to do over that broadband connection is a interlinked conversation, but there is a small distinction there. And until that Fios reaches my home in Pacoima, I continue to be a cable customer. So I'm not overlooking you, Ms. McIntyre.
But I would say, Mr. Chair, and I'm not in disagreement. The question becomes, unlike when we were doing Lifeline telephone service, clearly there was a life and death issue that was associated with that. And the same was true when we did the high cost fund into rural areas. There was a life and death issue that was associated with that. But we paid for it, and on the margin, there were people who had a higher service bill in order to cover that cost. And I think as a policy, we have to continue to ask the question, is the additional cost that we pay for the subsidy, does it merit in each case that public investment? Is it something that the lady in Compton would buy on her own, and in some instances, not everybody in Compton will qualify. So, if I make the cut $27,000, and I'm just pulling a number out of the air, if I make the cut, $27,000 gets the subsidy. So the lady who makes $27,001, she pays an additional $10 a month to subsidize her next door neighbor who makes $1 less. And I'm just saying that on the margins, we sometimes push people away from service that they could have afforded if we'd have left them alone. So and wherever you draw the line, you always have that same issue. So the question we always have to ask is, given that it is not, if it's entertainment, then I don't think we should subsidize it because that's a choice. As it moves into life or death situations like the health care and the other things, but I'm not sure how far away that is. But we certainly have to consider the platform and when we develop it. But I think we always have to take into account just the marginal cost of subsidizing services, and is this a good use of, and again, not your investment is your investment. You make that as a business choice. And so clearly, if you make a business choice, that's kind of sort of your business. You figured out that your investment in a twisted pair network will soon be obsolete, and you've got so much money in it that you upgrade it to try to get the last few years of service out of a system that may well become itself obsolete anyway. But that's the business that you're in, and I don't have a quarrel with that. I'm just looking at, should I make the lady who lives next door to somebody who makes $2 less a month, should she subsidize the lady next door for her entertainment value? And I'm not sure what the answer is, but that's why I'm raising the question that way.
No, and it's exciting given the evolution of technology. It's exciting given the amount of choice that's out there for consumers, both on a hardwired and a wireless standpoint. I'm sure we'll continue to see changes in all that. A couple of questions. Gentleman from Verizon mentioned that they have chosen to not pursue Recovery Act funding. Can you sort of reiterate why that's so? And then I'll ask the question to AT&T if they've made a similar choice.
Yes. At the time the applications were due, the requirements, rules, some of the restrictions involved were not clear, and I don't believe they're entirely clear today on how the federal government will treat those funds and what they will require in return for the provision of those funds. And so at the time, we opted that the uncertainties involved in the program outweighed the benefit and decided that we would sit back and watch. We have pursued CASF funding. That program was more clear to us. We understood more how it operated. So we at the time made a business decision that we would decline to apply.
Okay. Mr. Devine.
There aren't too many occasions when I have a chance to publicly agree with my friends at Verizon, but let me agree. We are of the same mind. We are not taking ARRA funding, and for the same reasons, we have not applied for any with any projects. But we continue to invest clearly, and we continue to clearly invest in California in multiple technologies, both wireline and wireless, and I think that was part of my testimony.
Okay. And let me just explain why that question is important to me, and we can pursue it even after today. Many of you will recall I was in the state capitol about 4 years ago, a little bit less than 4 years ago, with a very different hat, testifying as to why we should have written in as ambitious or aggressive build-out requirements as possible in DIVCA. And it was because my experience at a city level at the time was for cable companies, when you had a franchise agreement, we required that if a new service or feature was offered anywhere within a franchise area, you needed to commit to a schedule and map of how that feature and service was going to be available to everybody in that footprint. It didn't make sense as to why that wouldn't be the case for statewide franchises, or at least something a lot closer to it. And so flash forward to today, I opened the hearing with this recognition that at the Broadband Task Force report, we started with the 96% of Californians have some sort of option. My goal, if it's not clear by now, is to move that needle from 96 to as close to 100 as possible. Now, from a business decision standpoint, Verizon, AT&T, cable, others have gone pretty far. 96% ain't bad. How can we get the last 4? Well, here we are seeking through a variety of public programs to help. Emerging Technologies Fund, Teleconnect Fund on the adoption service side, CASF. And that's been, I think, for the most part successful. And now there's Recovery Act dollars on the table on top of that. Not separate and apart from CASF, but to be leveraged with CASF. And we have a couple of parties who have chosen not to pursue that funding. Doesn't make you a bad person, but it makes me wonder why. Especially given both the combination of Recovery Act and CSF money, how highly leveraged of an opportunity that could be to move that 96 towards 100.
Mr. Chairman, if I may suggest to just add to the analysis that you just described, the other variable that differs today that we did not have in the years when we were creating the traditional telephone subsidies, when we only had one carrier per service territory and the technology was limited to landline phone. In today's environment, we have multiple technologies in the market available, all expanding at a rapid clip. No one knows which technology may be the best for any given community or which technology may reach a breakthrough as we move forward. So many companies are investing in multiple technologies, and it's not always clear that the old model, let's run a wire everywhere, is necessarily, when you're at the most expensive and the most remote areas, that's necessarily the only solution or the best solution. So we're hoping, as I testified earlier, we cover 100% because we have satellite technology available for that last 5% of the market.
As you heard from Mr. Morris in the previous panel, now that there's hope or expectation that we're going to add to that 96% figure the addition of some wireless numbers on top of that. I don't know if we'll still be at 96 because I'm both a cable subscriber at home and I have a BlackBerry, or we're going to move the needle a little bit more. So unless you have some information on the wireless side you'd like to share.
Nothing additional.
No sneak previews?
No.
You heard it here first? So those satellite numbers are going to be shared now with the PUC, or we're moving in that direction?
We've made our data available in the past.
But that includes the wireless, the satellite numbers you're talking about now, this partnership that you have.
We do have a partnership with Wild Blue. It is on our website. The service is available statewide. Okay.
Another question relative to Senator Wright's observation about hardwire versus wireless. We heard some comments about sort of a comparability here. The wireless devices, are folks at the table arguing that that is a functional equivalent of a landline from a speed, processing speed, capability standpoint? Is that a yes or a no? Maybe I need to rephrase the question.
Senator Padilla, for purposes of the Advanced Services Fund, it's focused on the down and up speeds, and wireless can be a functional equivalent to services that people get over landlines.
And like I was trying to say earlier, I think that if you looked at what is needed today, you probably could say they're functionally equivalent. If you look down the road to the future with what, the continued expansion of demand for broadband, then I think you'll see what the wireless issue or the wireless service hit a cap or hit a limit where it will no longer be an equivalent.
Okay. Senator Dutton, Senator Kehoe, any questions for this panel? Let me then begin to wind it down and in some ways transition towards the next panel or the one after that. How has the current economic climate impacted the great plans you had a couple of years ago, whether it was part of a DFCA commitment or aside? Your ability to invest at this point in time, has it changed at all? Have you had to adjust your game plan here?
Mr. Chairman, Carolyn McIntyre again on behalf of the California Cable and Telecommunications Association. As I noted earlier with my comments, our industry has continued since DFCA to make commitments at or above the level that we were previously investing in California. I don't think we made any commitments as regards to DFCA, but I think our record certainly supports our commitment.
Kurt Rasmussen. We certainly have made our DFCA commitments, and we're on track to continue to do so. I think it's difficult to separate the impacts of competition from the impacts of the economy. I would say the economy has affected some of our growth rates and has put some pressure on our future investment. It hasn't been, I wouldn't categorize it as extreme, but once again, it's difficult to separate those impacts from the impacts that competitive inroads are having on our company.
We would agree with that. There are parts of our business that are growing rapidly and we're investing heavily, and there are other parts of our business that have been more heavily impacted by this recession, and those parts of our business are shrinking and revenues are declining.
Okay, thank you all very much. The reason I ended with that question is it's not just a dollars and cents investment question, but parallel to that is the ability to create jobs question, which we'll get to on the workforce component of today's hearing. So thank you all for your testimony. Let's move on to the next panel to focus on adoption and access. I believe it's Jack Lutz who's coming back from the PUC along with Richard Chabran from the California Community Technology Policy Group. And as with the previous panel, let me ask you to each strive for about 5 minutes each and leave plenty of room for Q&A.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. The California Teleconnect Fund, to be very specific, is a program that the Commission adopted about 10 years ago that was aimed at mostly public schools and libraries so that they could take advantage of new technology and high-speed services that were becoming available in the marketplace. You have a handout from me, and I'd like to focus you on page 3, in which we describe the participants that were eligible at the end of the year. And the program has about 4,300 participants now. The subsidies that are available to participants provide up to 50% discounts for a number of high-speed services from both traditional telecommunications companies as well as other types of information service providers, and in some cases cable companies. The current budget is approved at $65 million per year, and that's represents a significant growth from the original program level of about $25 million per year, because if you turn to page 7, we give you a pie chart of who receives discounts. At the end of 2009 and forecast through June of this year, schools will receive about 40% of the discounts. Community-based organizations, which is the green slice identified as CBOs, receive about 28% of the discounts. Community colleges were a recent addition to the program through legislation passed in the last 2 years. They receive about 18% of the funds, and government hospitals and clinics receive about 12%, and that to me represents the growth of telemedicine opportunities throughout the state. And libraries are the small slice who receive 2% of the funds available. And that's the information on CTF, and I'll respond to questions.
Thank you very much.
Richard Chabran. I'm with the California Community Technology Policy Group. Thank you, Chairman Padilla, for allowing us time to speak. One of the things that I wanted to share, which is a little bit different perspective from what people have talked about so far, is there's been a lot of emphasis on